In the last episode of Letters to the Church, I looked at Larry Neville's 1990 letter to Wayman Mitchell, the founder of the Potter's House, and the Board of Elders. That letter documents why Larry Neville pulled his entire church out of the fellowship. This is the second episode in that series, and this time the document is a 2003 letter from Pastor Rudy van Diermen. The central issue here is different, but closely related. Neville's letter raised the question of whether the fellowship had become structurally rigid and relationally coercive. Rudy van Diermen's letter raises a narrower and more concrete question. Why should a pastor be required to sign a legal contract placing his ministry, church, assets, and future conduct under centralized authority?
He's a Jewish crusader. He's anti-Christian Jewish crusader. That's what Mr. Ross is.
People are held in captive. They're held in fear.
To watch Greg Mitchell weave his so-called magic.
Worldwide franchise of Potter's Houses and Victory Chapels. Wayman Mitchell is founder and chairman of the board.
Welcome back to the channel. This is Letters to the Church, episode 4.2. This series is built around documents, letters, statements, and internal material connected to the Potter's House, the Door, Victory Chapel, and the wider Christian Fellowship Ministries network. The aim is to start with the document itself, then analyze what it says, what it assumes, and why it matters. Today's document is a letter dated the 5th of March 2003, sent from Pretoria by Pastor Rudy van Diermen to pastors in the fellowship. The letter includes a copy of a pastor's contract that Rudy says Wayman Mitchell wanted him to sign, and that if he refused, support for his church would have been stopped. He also says the contract had to be notarized, and that this reflected a move from fellowship to business organization. I am now going to read the letter and the attached contract text in full. After that, I will identify the main claims in the document and explain why it matters to the wider discussion about whether the Potter's House functions as a high-control religious system, more commonly referred to as a cult. Pretoria, 5th of March 2003. To all the pastors in the fellowship. Hereby I am sending you a copy of the pastor's contract that Pastor Mitchell wanted me to sign. And if I would have refused to sign it, he would have stopped the support of our church. I not only had to sign it, but also I had to go to the notary public and let them sign it too. So the world's court system and money domination is being used as a threat to keep pastors in line. This form, sooner or later, every pastor will have to sign. This is the direction Pastor Mitchell is taking the fellowship. It is not a fellowship anymore. It is an organization, something we never wanted to become, a business organization. It is very, very crucial for all of you to remember how we started. We started as a fellowship of friends. Support was a gift of love. The vision of our fellowship is that all over the world, indigenous, autonomous, and self-supporting fellowships would arise with their own conference. Anyone that would plant 25 churches could start their own conference agreed upon in the Phoenix leadership. Some conferences started out of need of location. The vision of multiplication is that all over the world men were going to function as a powerful copy of Pastor Mitchell's leadership. The vision is to train men and to train them so well that they fully can and will function totally separate from you. And a new fellowship is formed. And over that new fellowship, the first pastor has totally no authority. Otherwise, multiplication is impossible. Through that multiplication of disciples and churches and leaders totally released in the world is going to be reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is the risk Jesus Christ took. That is the risk we will have to take. If we do not want to take that risk, then we need to start looking for another job. 2 Timothy 2 verse 2. On this text, our fellowship is based. Pastor Mitchell appointed an eldership over the entire fellowship, which is a violation of our vision. Elders are pastors, so to appoint 7 pastors over our whole fellowship creates a headquarters in Prescott, something we all, including Pastor Mitchell, never wanted. If you want to appoint an eldership, actually not necessary, you will have to use your own men as leaders over your own fellowship. That is why the new eldership appointment of the 7 according to our vision should have been Pastor Mitchell's own disciples over his own fellowship, and in Harold's fellowship, Harold's men, and in Joe Campbell's fellowship, Joe Campbell's men, and in Mike Maston's, Hank Houghton's, Bill Coolidge, Tommy Alvarez, Dill Reese, Greg Johnson's fellowships, their own men, and in Rudy van Diermen's fellowship, Rudy van Diermen's men, etc., etc. Pastor Mitchell is violating our vision of discipleship and multiplication. In an old sermon of Pastor Mitchell, I found the following quote: "A movement will start with a man. That man is given a message. That movement starts developing methods. Then that movement starts to develop into an organization. Then, unavoidably, it degenerates into a grave, tomb, or a mausoleum or a museum. This is the course of history in which it always goes." Read the contract for yourself. Pastor Rudy van Diermen, Pretoria. Pastor Contract. Dated this blank day of blank 2000 blank. I blank hereby subscribe to the bylaws of the Christian Fellowship Church Incorporated, an Arizona corporation. DBA, the Potter's House Christian Fellowship. I submit myself to the leadership and board of elders put in place to minister order and discipline in oversight of this fellowship. I submit my ministry to Pastor Wayman Mitchell or his successors. I make a solemn commitment before God and this church in blank state of blank. I will abide by the standards, doctrines, and vision to make disciples, plant churches, and work in unity with the fellowship as a pastor and steward of this church. If at any time in the future I decide I can no longer work in good faith with this church or leadership, I will resign from my position, leave the church in good order, and not cause any further disruption in that church or any other fellowship church. I further state, I am in subjection to Pastor Mitchell and the Board of Elders of the Christian Fellowship Ministries. Should they see fit to remove me for moral indiscretion, financial insolvency, doctrinal error, or a disruptive spirit causing harm to the church or fellowship, I will submit to their direction and surrender all church bank accounts, buildings, equipment, and assets, and go quietly on to redirection, discipline, and relocation. Signed blank, dated blank, notary public blank, dated blank. Rudy van Diermen's letter makes several specific claims. First, he says the issue is not merely doctrinal agreement or pastoral cooperation. He says a formal contract was being used to secure institutional control, and that continued financial support was tied to signing it. That is important because it moves the discussion from informal culture into written obligations, asset control, and enforceable structure. The letter explicitly says Pastor Mitchell wanted Rudy to sign the contract, and that refusal would have meant support being stopped. Second, the attached contract requires the pastor to submit his ministry to Wayman Mitchell or his successors. It states that if the pastor can no longer work in good faith with the leadership, he must resign, leave the church in good order, and not cause any further disruption. It also says that if leadership removes him, he will surrender all bank accounts, buildings, equipments, and assets and go quietly into redirection, discipline, and relocation. That is not a loose statement of shared mission, it is a document for control. Third, Rudy's argument is that this contract contradicts the original vision of the fellowship as he understood it. His claim is that the fellowship began as a network of friends, that support was given as an act of trust and shared mission, and that multiplication meant leaders eventually functioning separately, not permanently under the authority of the sending pastor. He says plainly that once a new fellowship is formed, the first pastor has totally no authority. Otherwise, true multiplication becomes impossible. Fourth, he argues that centralized leadership over the whole fellowship violates that same vision. His objection is not only to contracts, it is to the creation of a headquarters model in Prescott, with 7 pastors functioning over the entire network. Rudy's position is that if eldership exists at all, it should arise within each leader's own fellowship, not as a centralized apparatus over all the churches. In other words, he is identifying centralization itself as the problem. That point is significant in light of later reporting. In a later article published by a major Dutch Christian newspaper, Rudy's brother, Eddie, is quoted as saying that things changed in the early 1990s, that the fellowship turned into an organization, and that the joint leadership became a structure in which one pastor was in charge. The same article says contracts began circulating to ensure planted churches remained part of Christian Fellowship Ministries, making it very difficult for pastors to leave with congregations they had built. There is another reason this letter matters. It does not only concern abstract church polity, it intersects with the later history of Zwolle. Articles published by a major Dutch Christian newspaper says Evert Valk succeeded Rudy van Diermen in Zwolle in 2002, after having already been involved in day-to-day management for several years. The same reporting says that Rudy, who had moved to South Africa in 1997, had repeatedly raised concerns about Valk's serious marriage problems and warned Mitchell shortly before Valk's appointment not to place him in the position of pastor, but that Mitchell persisted. If a centralized leader can override local warnings, install a pastor anyway, and still retain the authority to demand submission, contracts, and asset surrender, then the problem is not just bad policy on paper. The problem is a structure in which decision-making is concentrated upward, while responsibility and fallout are distributed downward. That does not mean this letter proves the Potter's House is a cult in the fullest possible sense, but it does mean the document has evidential value in the larger cult discussion. It provides contemporaneous insider evidence of several features that are commonly examined in cults: centralized authority, institutional claims over local church assets, contractual subjection to leadership, pressure to leave quietly if disagreements arises, and the use of financial dependence as leverage. The attached contract text is especially important because it reduces those dynamics to writing. There is also a later personal dimension to this. In a newspaper article's later reporting, Rudy's brother Eddie says that when he directly challenged Mitchell about whether the Council of Elders could truly contradict him, Mitchell first said yes, then later warned Eddie that if he continued, he would endanger his family, children, grandchildren, and position in the church. Eddie said he experienced that as intimidation. The same article says Eddie was expelled from church in Zwolle in late 2019, ending 42 years of involvement. So this is why Rudy van Diemen's letter is important. It documents an internal dispute over what the fellowship was becoming, not just whether pastors should be loyal, not just whether discipline should exist, but whether a fellowship of churches had become a centralized organization using contracts, money, authority, and property control to keep pastors in line. That is a serious allegation, and unlike a vague retrospective complaint, this one came with a document attached. That is why this letter belongs in this series. In the last episode, Larry Neville's 1990 letter raised the question of disassociation and structural drift. In this episode, Rudy van Diemen's 2003 letter raises the question of legal and financial control. Taken together, these documents do not settle the discussion by themselves, but they do provide contemporaneous insider evidence that the concerns later raised about the Potter's House were not invented afterward. They were being articulated from inside the system as the system was evolving. If there are other letters, statements, contracts, or internal documents connected to the Potter's House, the Door, or Christian Fellowship Ministries that should be examined, please send them my way. The purpose of this series is simple: document first, analysis second. This discussion is only worth having if it remains evidence-led. My name is Joel Crosby, and on this channel I examine the history, doctrines, finances, scandals, and internal culture of the Potter's House. When I use the name the Potter's House, I am also referring to the Door, Victory Chapel, Lighthouse, and the wider Christian Fellowship Ministries network, often called the Fellowship. The branding may vary, but it is the same movement, founded by Wayman Mitchell and now led by his son Greg Mitchell. Subscribe to follow this series and watch the other videos on the channel to explore the wider case in more detail. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.